Last year we spoke about some points from Siman Kuf Peites. We said we're going into Siman Reish Dalet, so we're going to start with Siman Reish Dalet today. First two Sa'ifim. The Siman begins with the halacha that even according to Din, or Chachamim Paskin, you cannot purchase metaltalin, cannot purchase movable things that move with just transfer of money, but rather you need a kinyan. Still in all, so still in all, someone who changes his mind and retracts after receiving money, after there's a transfer of money, whether it's the buyer or it's the seller, Shulchan Aruch is lo'asa ma'aseh Yisrael. He didn't do the actions that a Jew is supposed to do, and therefore he's supposed to accept upon himself a mishapora. Mishapora is, we spoke about it last year, that the Eibishter, the Bezdin tells him, or you do it in the Bach, in the previous, in the discussion over there, who says it and where, etc. But the idea behind it is that whoever the Eibishter who took revenge from the Deira Mabul and from the Deira Peloga and from Anshe Sdoim will take revenge and will pay whoever doesn't keep up to his words. This is different than somebody who did a discussion, a business deal which was sealed by words only. By words only, you don't get Mishapara. The Mechaber concludes this is also if he only gave part of the money and then either side retracted it. Rabbi Kiva Eger right away points out over here, an interesting point, that even if the seller, let's say the seller commits, because this is really something which you're going to see later about prices going up, prices going down, but over here, even if the seller says, if the price is going to go up, I will still keep the deal. That means even though I'm going to lose money off the deal, he still technically could retract his words and get a mishapara. And it's why? Because it's just words like stamazay. It's not considered an actual agreement. But if the buyer is the one that, this is only if the seller says, if the value goes up, I'm still going to keep the old price. But if the buyer says, I will not retract from the sale, even if the price goes down, then he is stuck with his deal. Why? Because he brings from the Pnei Yeshua that it's as if he told him L'chatchila that this money is like I'm moichelet. If I change my mind, I'm moichelet. Now, it's an interesting point to point out. If you see in your prints of the Shulchan Aruch, when it comes to Rabbi Kiva Eger, you have what's printed and you have, or it says afterwards, Miksav Yad. That means in later prints they have different, in the brown ones, you'll see it, in the first Rabbi Kiva Eger and Reish Dalet, that it's as if it's so what's interesting to see is in the printed ones, he says that maybe this works. Maybe it's considered a mechila, after the mahani, maybe it works, but in the actual, from the Ksav Yad, it says mahani, it does work. So it's interesting that, just to point out, sometimes you look at things and you just realize that there's mamish a difference, because in the Ksav Yad, he paskins that it works, and such a agreement locks the deal, but in the printed one, it doesn't say that. Now, why is there no difference between a seller and a buyer who retracts out of a deal? There should be a difference between them. The Beis Yosef simply says, Mishapara is not is simply you change your mind. You're not following what you're supposed to. So the Mishapara is whoever is not Omer b'dibur. Both of them said a dibur. Whichever one is not Omer is the one who gets punished. Now, why is, if it is also Beis Yosef, why is it that if you only gave part of the money, you still get a mishapara even though you didn't pay the full price? So the Beis Yosef explains that when it comes to metaltalin, as opposed to karka, and there goes a whole discussion, a big Bis Yosef, I'm not going to go into it now, that when we're dealing with metaltalin, the fact that part of the money is given is considered partially a kinyan, le'inyan, mishapara. And he proves it from the Gemara, and the Bis Yosef says, I already spoke about it in Siman Kuf Tzadik, regarding karkos, and whatever I said regarding karka also applies over here regarding metaltalin. Now, the Prisha over here also says something which, just a simple definitions. It's always good, even though you already know it, but it's always good to have the definitions of concepts. Why is over here mishapara and in Siman Kuf Peites Layomid B'diburai is only Mechusar Amana without a mishapara? It says very simple. We look at whether there was an action with the words or there's a words without action. Words without action are nothing. So it's a dibur she'ein b'maisa. There was no money transfer. The words without action. Words without action, the most that it could be mechusar amana. Your words, you said words, and you retracted your words. But when you put your money where your mouth is, then if you're going to break it, then it's more than just words against words, and therefore there is a mishapara. It's more than just a mechusar amana. Like I mentioned to you before regarding who says mishapara, where is mishapara said, what nusach of mishapara you're going to say. Look in the Beis Yosef and the Bach and the Darkei Moshe, they bring all the shittas. You'll see it. It's an interesting discussion. If the Gabbai says it in Shul, or one Dayan says it, the whole Bezdin says it. There's different opinions how this mishapara is done. I have never seen a mishapara being done in Bezdin. I've been in Bezdin for 15 years, so I have never seen it, and as far as I know, it hasn't been done in many years, hundreds of years, that the official mishapara ceremony hasn't been done. Now, I guess people are scared of saying such things. Don't get people mad. People are more sensitive today. You're going to start threatening them. That snowflake generation. Okay, now the Knesset Agdela and Agoy Satur Ois Beis says that if a Meshaleach changes his mind, send a Shaleach to do something, to buy something for him, to pay for something. And then the Meshaleach changes his mind. So the Meshaleach still has to get he receives the Mishapara, not the Shleach. You see that he brings in the name of the Maram Mintz, who brings in the name of the Ravia. This is what the Knesset Agdela says. Tzemach Tzedek, Choshen Mishpat Siman Chavtes, Tshuva, discuss a very interesting Tshuva actually, it's a long Tshuva, regarding a Shleach who was told to do something, and he did something else. Messed up the deal. Not fully, but he messed up the deal. He was supposed to sell a certain product, and he didn't sell it for cash, he sold it for credit. So now comes back and the Meshalech wants to retract. Says, I'm not going to ship this product to the buyer when he's not paying any cash. So the whole and the question was, who gets the Mishapara? If anybody gets the Mishapara. Meshalech says, I sent the Shliach to do something good and he messed up. So I'm not taking the Mishapara. And the Shliach says, you're the one retracting, I'm not retracting from the deal. So you should get the Mishapara. So Machzedek goes through the whole long tshuva and he says, neither of them get the Mishapara. Says the Shliach never gets a Mishapara. Doesn't make a difference what he does. He always has immunity. He never gets a Mishapara. The Meshalech sometimes gets Mishapara, but you can't give him a Mishapara here because he could say that the Shliach messed it up. Sometimes messing up is not enough to retract out of a deal. So Tzemach Tzedek, when you send a Shliach to do something for you, the category of messing up is much wider than by a regular person. So when I make a regular business deal, me and somebody else, we have responsibilities. We have to look at the deal. We have to make sure everything is done right. And only if there's an extreme mess up, then you can retract from the deal. There's always going to be something that's not exactly perfect like you expected. But You can't just retract out of every deal. But when it comes to Meshaleach and a Shliach, the Meshaleach could say, I sent you to get me the best deal. I sent you to do the best. You messed up, even though this mess up is not a mess up that I would have been able to get to retract based on it, but it's a mess up that only that I feel comfortable retracting because you're the one that messed up. That's already enough to retract and not to get mishapara. At the end, the Tzemach Tzedek throws even something even more. If the buyer didn't know that the shliach is a shliach, he thought the shliach is a seller. He didn't know that he's representing a somebody else. He just settled the deal, whatever, I'm buying this and this product. Still the shliach doesn't get a mishapara. Because ultimately he was a shliach and he was not the one that does it. And it's a very long tshuva, it's like 10 Sa'ifim. It's very easy. Probably, I'm not sure if it's in your book or not, but if it is, it's worth it to learn it. I think it's there. Is it? Chovtes? I don't remember if I put it in or not. It looks like I didn't put it in. Okay. No. Nice. I missed it. Okay. Now, what happens if they disagree? The Moicher says, I'm retracting. I'm not retracting. You never paid me for this. You gave me money. It's because you owe me money. You never gave me money to purchase a product. We spoke about purchasing a product. Then you gave me $1,000. And yeah, you owe me $1,000 from something else, and I took the $1,000. Or you gave it to me as a loan. You gave it to me as a pikadon. But it was nothing to do with the sale. So then, and he says, he says, I took it from you as a loan, I took it from you as a pikadon. Or when he says one of these, and he says, you know what? You claimed it was a sale. Here's your loan back. Here's your pikadon back. Get out of my life. We don't say. He says over there. We don't say mishapara because there's a disagreement. What exactly happened? You can't say the mishapara in the words of Hashem is going to charge you for what you did. You say Hashem will pay mishapara to whoever doesn't listen, not specifically beloshen noichach to this person. That's like a second level of mishapara, like a lower mishapara, that you don't say it directly to him. You say a more general one. Not mimcha, but mimisha einayimet b'dibura. Now the Mishpat Shalom, in the beginning of the Siman, it brings a bunch of this Mishpat Shalom, and this Siman is very lengthy, from the Marsham. It brings a lot of things. We're going to go through a few things now, we're going to go through a few things later. In the beginning, he brings these following three nekudas that I want to bring. First of all, is someone who gets a mishapara, is he considered a rasha that is pasal eidus or not? He brings different opinions. This is also discussed in other achrayim, and he brings different opinions lakan and lakan. But it seems that the Marsham's noted to say that it's not enough of a rasha to be considered pasal eidus. Now, just keep in mind this nekuda of a rasha because we're going to get to it later on a different angle. Next point he brings over there, that what we already discussed from the Maram Mintz, and something we already discussed from the Tzemach Tzedek the previous year, and we're probably going to get to it. We're going to get to it soon again. This is what the Mishpat Shalom brings from the Maram Mintz and Kuf Aleph, that tfisa doesn't work in such a scenario when there was only money given and the person wants to retract. You cannot do tfisa, even though there are opinions which hold that when you're chayav lotzes yidei shamayim, that when you says that you're chayav lotzes yidei shamayim, and in this scenario when the alternative is a mishapara, obviously you're chayav lotzes yidei shamayim, and there are shittas which say that by chayav lotzes yidei shamayim tfisa does work if the person who's supposed to receive it takes it. Even those opinions, Mishpat Shalom explains, even them are going to agree that in this scenario, even though there's a chayav lotzes yidei shamayim, tfisa will not work. Now the next point from the Mishpat Shalom is the tshuva from Imrei Eish, Choshen Mishpat Siman Chof Aleph, about contracts. This is where the Mishpat Shalom goes to the validity of contracts. He says, Reuven had a lot of grain stored by a goy. Stored, or he bought it. He has a contract with the goy that he's going to buy a certain amount of grain. And the grain is sitting by the goy. He already signed the contract with the goy. Then he goes, and he flips the contract to Shimon. Sells it to Shimon, and whatever, he makes money off the flip. It's a normal thing. He says, you can't go back on this deal. Even though all you did was you flipped the contract. Still, you cannot say, there was no kinyan, there was nothing. You can't say that you retract it. Why? Because a contract is like a setumta, and setumta we're going to get to somewhere down the line this year, hopefully, that is considered a kinyan. Kinyanim that are done in this territory, in this country, in this city, in this neighborhood, in this community, as a normal way of doing business. And then he goes to discussion. Okay, that's when you're dealing with a guy. But what happens when you're dealing with a yid? Yid, we have dinei shtaras, dinei kinyanim. He says, no, by yid also works. Why? Because in our countries, the Mishpat Shalom says, by us, it's already accepted. And he says, not like the Chasam Sofer, who had a suffix about our countries, if it's valid or not. And he brings also from the Shalom Meishiv, in Madura Revi'o, Chelik Aleph, Siman Nun Ches, that a transfer of a contract is already considered in those countries like a kinyan. Now, these are the Ashkenazi poskim. Let's take the complete other extreme. The Beis Yaakov on Choshen Mishpat, Sifkot and Aleph, brings from the Shas HaTshuvas Divrei Emes, Siman Yud Beis, big chiddush, exactly the opposite. In a place where, according to Din of the Malchusa, they only sell with contracts, that's the Din of the Malchusa. He says he's not kaina. Doesn't work. Why? Because he's a yid and he knows that this is only done because it's in the Malchusa. He doesn't take it seriously. He just says, okay, whatever. This is how it's done in this country. So we'll sign whatever papers have to be signed. Whatever has to be submitted, and that's it. And Poiras Yosef adds that therefore you don't have to do a mishapara if you back out of a contract which is only legally binding, because as a yid you're supposed to follow the Jewish contract. It's the exact opposite of today, and nobody paskins like that. Everybody paskins that a contract is a contract. It's tumta, everything is done with contracts. Otherwise, nobody has any houses, nobody has anything, and nobody owns anything today. Now, what happens? A similar form of a flip, not with a contract, but with cash. Only mois, we know mois and amkoinas metaltalin. I went and I purchased metaltalin with cash. I didn't do a kinyan, still sitting by the seller. I go and I then sell my products that I never took possession of, to the next person. I flip it and I take from him cash. And now the second buyer wants to back out of the contract with the first buyer. And the first buyer says, you can't back out. Come to Bez and get a mishapara. So the Mishpat Shalom brings from the Maram Al-Shech, Siman Yud, there's no mishapara. Why? How can you sold something which is not yours? You sold him nothing. You didn't take possession of it. So all you did was, when do we say there's a mishapara? When something could be done. When this sale could be completed. When the kinyan could be done. Over here, before buyer one, who became now seller to buyer two, before buyer one takes possession, he can't transfer it. Because he didn't do a kinyan on it. Unless obviously we're talking about...
What did he sell to the second buyer? What did he sell to the second buyer, right?
Well, maybe in this country it worked, but he sold him the idea. He sold him that he could the contract, so to speak, but without a contract. But he says, but really, look at Noida Bihuda, Madura Kama Yeridei Siman Samachtas. That being that Yeshemrim that midaraisa mois koinos metaltalin. So therefore, a kinyan did happen via mois from seller 1 to buyer 1. Therefore, you should be able to get so buyer 1, when he becomes a seller to buyer 2, could demand a mishapara. And he goes into whole length, 3-4 pages, I'm not going to get into it now. And he doesn't really give a achra, but it seems like he's still noted to say that he does not take a mishapara. Now, when does the person get the mishapara? Let's say a buyer retracts, backs out of a sale. And the seller says, I am not giving you back your cash until you come to Bezdin to get a mishapara. I'm not going to back out of it. And the buyer says, I am not going to Bezdin to get a mishapara until you give me the cash. Because what's going to happen afterwards? I'll chop the mishapara and I'll have to go chase you in Bezdin, chase you down to get my money back. So I'm not willing to do it. And the Shoshanas Yaakov in Sifkot and Aleph deals with it. And he says, he's right. But he brings a raya from the Lashon of the Rambam. The Rambam says, when it comes to this din. And therefore he says, if he says, first you take the mishapara and then you receive the money. But Shoshanas Yaakov stays in Tzarechiyun, what's the halacha b'poil, if it is before it's not, or it's not. And we're going to get to it soon, there's other people who discuss it. The Pamoine Zov, also a one of the classics on Choshen Mishpat, Sifkot and Aleph, just points out, he says, don't get stuck on the word metaltalin in Shulchan Aruch over here. The Shulchan Aruch says metaltalin in the first seif, so don't get stuck on it. It says whatever, the mishapara will apply to karka also. If someone puts money down for karka and didn't do the kinyan, he also gets a mishapara if he backs out of it. Yeah, and that's how Pamoine Zov explains. Now Beis Yaakov also, the Beis Yaakov brings a tshuva har ha-karmel siman lamed vov, which takes this whole mishapara versus cash a step further than what the Shoshanas Yaakov was even thinking. And he says that so long as the person who backs out, as long as he doesn't accept a mishapara, the sale is valid. What does it mean the sale is valid? The kinyan kesef, it's midaraisa mois koines, and therefore to cancel, the chacham were the one that says mois is not koines. So therefore, money doesn't make a kinyan. So therefore, as long as there was no mishapara, this kinyan kesef was not voided, and therefore it's becheskas of the buyer. And there's even din Yerusha will apply. If the person passes away, it will go to the son, etc., etc. And according to that, comes the Beis Yaakov and starts a chkira. What happens if you have a suffix in the sale? Did the sale go through? Did the sale not go through? Who is the real owner? What's the halacha in the makim suffix? We go after the muchzuk, right? So who would be the muchzuk before mishapara? The buyer or the seller. They already want to retract, but there's no mishapara, so the contract is not voided. How does it work? Maybe according to this hara karmel, the buyer remains the muchzak until he takes upon himself the mishapara. And he says, it's a svara, but the Sheil Meishiv Tanyona Chelik Beis Siman Kuf Chov Zayin says that any suffix in any sale, doesn't mean nothing to do with mishapara. Any suffix in any sale which was done by cash only without a kinyan, the kech is never considered a muchzak. Not going into discussion of choizer, yes choizer, not choizer, there was a mishapara, not mishapara. He says no. The definition of muchzakus does not begin until a kinyan is made. You cannot be a muchzak in something until a kinyan is made. Just because there was a matan, just because there was a transfer of cash, doesn't make you a muchzak.
But it still affects Yerusha.
No, it's only according to the hara karmel, the way the Beis Yaakov understands the hara karmel. This is one side, that it's before Mishapara, it fully belongs, it's kimat fully belongs to the buyer, and is in the Yerusha. Then you have the Sheila Meisha, which doesn't really go into it, just says a general rule that there's no muchzakus, but it doesn't get into the technicalities of whether who owns it before the Mishapara. So the Beis Yaakov now brings the other extreme. What's the other extreme? Shasachu was Orient Lisoi, Siman Kuf Samachtes. In the name of the Maram Mintz, Siman Kuf Aleph, that this whole Mishapara is not bichlal a monetary discussion. It's not that the seller gives money and the buyer gives him the value of the money by a Mishapara. That's not how, it's nothing to do with it. Mishapara is nothing to do with money. And even if it was teifus, it doesn't work. And he says, what's the raya for it? Because the Shach says, Sifkat Nalef, that if there's a disagreement between the parties, what exactly happened, whether it's supposed to receive a mishapara, not supposed to receive a mishapara, we don't say that there's a shvua. Why don't we say that we do a shvua to see who's lying? To be mashbiya the person who's denying it. The Shach said, because it's not a monetary obligation. And then he says, but maybe there's another way of looking at it, and that's the shit of the Rambam. What's the Rambam? The Rambam that we mentioned before, but the Shoshanas Yaakov, the Rambam says that the seller holds the money until he receives the mishapara from the buyer, if the buyer retracts it. That's how it is in the Magid. That's how the Magid Mishnah also explains the Rambam, and really Shoshanas Yaakov, which we also mentioned before. So therefore, the fact that the money doesn't have to be given back, but the mishapara right away, but the mishapara has to be done, means that it is similar to a shvua. So the Beis Yaakov actually leaves it hanging. He says there's three ways of looking at it. It's not so clear what it is. He says you could either look at it that the mishapara is like a shvua, like the Rambam, but at the same time, lav dafker has an effect on the purchase. You could look at it like the Maram Mintz, that it's nothing to do with money, and therefore it's not it has nothing to do with money, and it's not connected one to another. Or you could look at the Harakanama. Yeah, but what's the nafkaminas between them? L'cha'ira dinei tfisa, who's a muchzak, right? Because who's a muchzak? There's the biggest nafkamina between all these opinions is when do we define muchzakus for one of them? Unless you take the opinion of Sheila Meisha that muchzakus is not connected to this, and you could just leave muchzakus out of the picture in any such sale. But otherwise, if we do consider that there is muchzakus is possible in such a scenario, the nafkamina would be before the mishapara, who is the muchzak. Because you could say that if the mishapara is a shavua, it has no effect on the muchzakus. Could be that the buyer is a muchzak regardless. He has to do until he gets the money back. Nothing to do with the mishapara. There's one din, when does the mishapara happen? Before or after cash. And there's another din, who is the owner? Who is the responsible? Who is the muchzak? You could be the muchzak before the mishapara is done, even if the mishapara is like a shvua, it's not a financial obligation. Or you could say that you're not a muchzak because it's not a financial obligation, it's only a shvua. Or you could say it is financial, it's not a shvua, and therefore you are a muchzak. So this muchzakus could go in any way. There is the Tzemach Tzedek that I mentioned last time. See, Yeridea Siman Shin Mem Hey, which there is a long tshuva. I don't know how it ended up in Yeridea. Over there I mentioned the previous shir, and over there in the middle of Sifkot and Yud Aleph, it goes into the discussion if tfisa helps if the buyer does tfisa after the moicher changed his mind. And he has to receive a mishapara because he paid, right? The seller has to receive a mishapara. But could the buyer do tfisa or not? And so Tzedek explains that when the seller takes upon himself the mishapara, for sure no tfisa works. Why? So you could think before, if we stop right here, you could say, well, Tzedek Tzedek is not a proof one way or the other, right? Because he says the seller takes a mishapara and the buyer cannot do tfisa. But everybody agrees that after mishapara the buyer cannot do tfisa. Oh, so Tzedek continues and doesn't say it's because of shvuah, it's because of that. He says no, because Chachamim said moisenim koines. Therefore, which means that there was never a kinyan and there was never any transfer of ownership, and therefore tfisa cannot work. Yeah, so which means that when the Tzemach Tzedek looks at it, that you're taking something that doesn't belong to you because there was never a transfer of ownership, moisenim koines. So tfisa, according to this logic, wouldn't help not before mishapara and not after mishapara. After mishapara, for sure not. But even before mishapara wouldn't help because moisenim koines. He doesn't accept the svara that because midiraisa mois koines you could start having a discussion about machzakas. No, midiraisa midirabana moisenim koines means it's over. There's nothing else to talk about. There's no transfer of ownership, and therefore there's no machzakas. That's from the Tzemach Tzedek. Now, now let's continue with another nekuda from the Beis Yaakov, because I mentioned him before. He brings from the Tshuvas Ksav Sofer, Yeridei Siman Kuf Zayin. Yeah, but what happens if a person had a deal with his father, and the father retracted the deal? Now the father is supposed to get a mishapara. Or who is supposed to demand a mishapara? The son. You're cursing the father. Isur. And the Ksav Sefer says that even according to the Rambam, the shit of the Rambam, that's brought in Yeridei Siman Reish Mem Aleph Sif Daled, that you have to be mechabet kibud av even to a father who is a Rasha. L'cha'oira, the Rambam will agree that someone who receives a mishapara, such a Rasha, doesn't deserve kibud av. Ksav Sefer says.
Child could give a mishapara?
Yeah. It's not so clear in Maskana. He's not machriya. He says, l'cha'oira, even the Rambam would be more. Then it goes back and forth, and then there's not machriya that the staki could do mishapara. Yeah. Yeah, but this is causing the father to be, the son's not the one who's cursing him. The Bezdin does it, but it's because of him. But at the same time now, so if you make him such a big rosh that you have to be kibudav, does he become pasul edus or not? I don't know. We'll leave it at that, because I don't know what them could be according to Ksav Sefer is pasul edus. Now what happens if somebody was supposed to get mishapara, because he retracted out of the deal, but seems like the Eibusha took care of it before the mishapara and the guy died. So now, do his sons receive a mishapara? Because now they are the ones who are holding, they're the ones who should have fulfilled the deal and they backed out. So the Erech Shai says, no, there's no mishapara. Mishapara dies when the person dies. Either side. That means if the person who's supposed to give the mishapara dies, his sons can't demand it. And if the person is supposed to demand is supposed to receive the mishapara dies, his children don't get it. Why? Because mishapara is not financial. It's not since it's not financial, it doesn't go by Yerusha. So he says, you have a Shas Tshuvas Hara Carmel, which we mentioned before, that as long as the money is not returned, there's no mishapara, and the kinyan moment is not cancelled, so the chayra, it should, according to Har Kam, the chayra should go down to the next generation, because it's financial in nature. And he says there are those who brought rayas to the Har Karmel. He says, but all the rayas don't apply. He takes apart every single raya. He says there's no svara whatsoever to say there's a kinyan kesef, that there's some kinyan until the mishapara happens, and he brings all the days at Paskin like that, the Maharal that we mentioned, the Chasam Sefer, and a bunch of other ones. He says, and therefore, since it's not financial, there is no mishapara, doesn't go down to the second generation. That's Seif, pretty much in the Kudus relevant to Seif Aleph. Let's go to Seif Beis. Yeah. Seif Beis has two dinim. First din. Person paid for schayra, and he didn't get it yet. But before the schayra was delivered to him, the seller had an oinus and he lost all the schayra. And the seller doesn't have a schayra anymore. The buyer comes and says, give me back my money or give me the schayra. He knows there's no schayra there. He's basically saying, give me back my money. So even though there's Eidim that there was an oinus, and even though there was he could prove that it was mamash oinus and he didn't do anything wrong, etc., etc., the buyer receives back the money, and there is no mishapara on the buyer. That's the first din in the sif. Second din in the sif is yashayimrim, that it's also if the schayra wasn't lost, but he's worried that all the schayra is going to go, there's oinus coming his way. He knows there's oinus coming his way, and he's going to take away all his schayra, and he doesn't want to take a risk. And over there the Mechaber says, Yashayim, that he is allowed to retract from the deal and get it, and it's the Mechaber doesn't bring any opinion for Kedr, just says Yashayim. Now, why, in such a scenario, start with the second one, why could he retract from his deal before he even lost it, just because he's worried he's going to lose it? The Smith is very simple. Sifkot and Daled. He tells him, what do you want from me? You want me to wait until you lose all your schayra? Wait until you have no money to pay me because you lost everything, and then I have to chase you in Bezdin. Why should we go through the whole headache? We can end up in the same place. There's much more headaches. Let's do it now and get it over with. Give me back the money and move on. The next thing that the Smeh points out is that the Lashon, the Mechaber, is call the whole schayra. But if it's only part of the schayra, he's worried that part of the schayra is going to get ruined. Like, for example, if he buys wine, he's worried it's going to become sour. Then it's not so. If it's only part of the schayra, he cannot retract the deal because of the oinus that's going to come to only part of the schayra. Now the Ulam HaMishpat, over here, Sifkot and Daled, says, I'm surprised that the Smeh should have brought Shittas HaTaisvis. When the Smeh over here brings the example of wine that's going to go bad, that only all of it is going to go bad, maybe he says if only if the whole schayra is going to get lost, but not if part of the schayra is going to get lost. Like, for example, wine is going to become sour. He says, I don't understand why he doesn't bring taisvus. The taisvus in Bava Metzia, Samach Daled Amud Aleph, the Ramas Chali Takfa. Over there, the taisvus paskins that if there is no agreement between the buyer and the seller from the onset regarding the quality of the wine, what's going to be, then if the wine becomes vinegar, he cannot go back on it with a chashash that it might become, he cannot retract, this is the Gemara, he cannot retract based on the chashash that it might become vinegar. Why? Because vinegar also has clients. So it's not that you lost everything. You lost part, you didn't lose everything. Unless you made a specific deal that the wine has to stay perfect until you receive it, the wine could go bad. But based on this logic, that because you have clients for vinegar, you can't retract, that's not only when you have a chashash that is going to be machmitz, even after it all became vinegar, you still can't retract the deal. You bought 2 barrels of wine, you ended up with 2 barrels of vinegar. According to Taisus, you can't retract it. So the Ulam HaMishpat says, l'chayra, you can't retract either way. So why did the Smeh only mention that you can't retract when your choishesh is going to become vinegar? The Smeh says you can't retract when your choishesh is going to become vinegar. You can't retract even after it became vinegar. And he leaves it as a question. Now the Mishpat Shalom brings from the Shad HaMishpat. Every book in Choshen Mishpat has the word Mishpat, so you're just going to have to keep track of all of them. Mishpat Shalom brings from the Shad HaMishpat on the Siman that a different, another angle regarding this topic, that if part of the schayda gets ruined, you're supposed to have 10 trucks, yeah, and you know the 2 trucks are going to get mugged on the way or whatever. Something is going to happen to them. So you're going to lose part of the schayda. You could retract. Why? He says, this din in Shulchan Aruch, and he doesn't receive Mishapara. He says, this din in Shulchan Aruch, that all the schayda is going to get, that Rabbi Yerucham says, which is a mocker of the Shulchan Aruch, that regarding that you have to have kol ha-mekach, chelek ma-mekach, the whole thing is going to go bad. It's regarding vinegar. It's regarding wine that becomes vinegar. It's regarding wine. That over there, what changes? Not the quantity. You still have the same 2 or 10 barrels. Changes what's inside the barrel. So over there, there's a discussion if you could go back. There's a machlokes, which you're going to get to in a second from the Beis Yosef. There's a machlokes, Bechlal, whether you could go back on future oinus that's going to go bad or not. But when you know that part of the schayda is for sure, that there was an oinus and part of the schayda, you could retract it. Because that schayda is no longer in this world. You could retract based on that part of the schayda, which is no longer in this world. Only when we're talking about that the whole schayda is banned, just to change quality, that's when there's the argument. But when the part of the schayda disappears from this world, if it disappears from the warehouses, then there's no mishapara. Now back to the smeh. The smeh over there, we're talking about the whole schayda, part of the schayda. Says go look in the Beis Yosef and the Darkei Moshe. So you look in the Beis Yosef, parallel to Sif Beis, which is based on, which brings the Tur. Well, the Tur brings the name of his father, the Rosh. This specific thing about worrying, about retracting from a chashash that is going to be an oinus to the whole schayda, to everything. That you could retract, and there's no mishapara, etc., etc. And the Beis Yosef, that's the day of the Tur, and he brings in the name of his father, the Rosh, and the Beis Yosef says, that's also Rabbi Yerucham in the name of Rav Haiga, and Rabbi Nutam, and the Ran in the name of the Ravid. He says, but then the Beis Yosef says, but the Ran himself holds that the Ran himself disagrees, and he holds that you do get a mishapara for oinus that you're worried is going to happen. You could only retract an oinus that already happened. And the Ran says that in the name of Rav Haiga, in the name of Rabbi Chananel. And the Beis Yosef brings other opinions. The Beis Yosef is not machriya. Puts both opinions. In Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef is machriya. Why? He says Yashemim only brings the second day, but it's still Yashemim. Doesn't bring the opposing ones. In the Be'er HaGoyla under Shulchan Aruch, he points out on this halacha, yes, there are other Yashemim, there are other people that disagree, that the Beis Yosef brings. He didn't bring them here. Why didn't he bring them? The Be'er HaGoyla sends you to look in the Bach. What does the Bach say? The Bach says, we have a machlokes, big machlokes over here. Machlokes of Goinim and Rishonim. How are we going to deal with this machlokes? Very simple. Anytime there's a machlokes on such a thing, we say, Kula lo nitva, chumra lo teveya. The nitva gets out easy, because you want to take something out of him, and there's a machlokes. And the teveya loses. So teveya is the one who wants a mishapara out of the nitva. And the nitva is the one who's supposed to give the mishapara. So therefore we paskin, in any such scenario, we paskin like the opinions that any time there's a machlokes regarding whether there should be a mishapara or not, a machlokes or shaynim, we go according to the opinion that there is no mishapara. You can't do a mishapara. So the Mishpat Shalom comes and says, based on this Bach, l'chayda, what are we talking about? When the only thing the seller wants is the mishapara, or the only thing the buyer wants is the mishapara. But what happens now if the seller is the one who wants to keep the deal going, and he has the cash in his hand, and the nitva is the one who wants to back out of the deal? So the nitva, the lekech, the buyer, the chayir, is going to have to take a mishapara. Why? Because the seller still has his cash. And he says, I'm not releasing the cash till I give him the mishapara. It's a suffix. I'm the muchzik on the cash. Yeah. So he says, and the Mishpat Shalom says, Taki has a point, and he's going to have to take a mishapara, the buyer, to be able to get his cash, even though it's a suffix in such a scenario. In a scenario of being worried for future oinus, we're talking about. But we're going to give him the lower level of mishapara. The mishapara, that's beloshen noichach. Not beloshen noichach. That's the general mishapara. Comes Davnei Choshen and says, Sivkot and Beis, no, wait. Where does Svara come from? Since when is the seller muchzak in the cash that he has in his hands for a purchase that wasn't completed yet? And he says, that's not what the Bach is talking about. The Bach is giving you a general rule. Any suffix, he says even the Bach will agree that the money that's in the hands of the seller, he's not a muchzak in that money. Just like somebody who borrows money, doesn't become a muchzak in something that doesn't belong to him. He got the money to fulfill the sale. How did he become a muchzak in the money? There's no bailus of the money yet. So the fact that the other guy has a right, according to certain opinions, to demand to back out, he's not going to get a mishapara, and he's entitled to receive his money. Comes Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Yeah, let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch. And we said if nenas, if it's totally opposite from what the Shulchan Aruch says. What did we think until now? That when it's nanas, you cannot go back on it. You could go back on the deal. When it's going to be nanas, some opinions say you could, some opinions say you can't. The Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, look in the Razo, that he holds that if it was already nanas, it's no longer in existence, and it's clear that it's a balamoyer, yeah, that's no longer in existence, then you cannot go back on it. You cannot go back on the deal. Why? You got messed up, oinus, and it's not. You can't hold him hostage for it because it's not bailam anymore. But if it wasn't nanas yet, only you're worried that it's going to become nanas, then you could retract it because it's still bailam. And he says, based on that, if the behemoth dies, you're supposed to buy a behemoth, and the behemoth dies. The behemoth is still bailam. Yeah, a dead cow is still there. If that cow is still there, you could still be chayzer by. Could still buy them. The Knesset Agdola brings the name of the Marashdam. Knesset Agdola and Goyes Atur Sivkot Nid Beis brings the name of the Marashdam. Choshen Mishpat סימן Reish Tzadik. It's just a clarification point to this whole discussion. He says this, that you could be chayzer, this whole discussion, you could be chayzer, you can't be chayzer, when you could be chayzer, is obviously when the only transfer was cash. Obviously, if you made a kinyan, you cannot be chayzer anymore. If you made an actual kinyan on the schayra, and it's sitting in the other guy's place, then you can't now retract from your kinyan because you worry that oinus is going to come. And if you do, you're supposed to get a mishapara. The Shach tells you, look in this Marashdam. Shach doesn't say specifics, and Shach Choshen Mishpat is mostly Mar Mekaymes in this section. He says, look in the Marashdam, which means obviously he agrees with the Marashdam, which I just mentioned from the Knesset Agdola. So the Dvar HaMishpat was the grandson of the Knesset Agdola, Sivkot and Yud, says, I don't understand my grandfather bringing the Marashdam, pretty much. I understand the Shach supporting the Marashdam. Says the Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Yudal Amud Aleph discusses somebody that sold a field sheloi ba'achrayus, which didn't much later in 40 simanim down. Someone who sells a property, and he says, clearly I'm not taking any liability for anything that's going to happen. And there's already starting to be rumors that this might not be this guy's property, you might be buying something that you're going to lose. So it says over there, the buyer could back out of it before he made a chazakya on the field. He could back out of the deal. Taisvus over there, the Riva over there writes, that means that their kinyan was already made, but he didn't do a chazakah on the property. So the Dvar Mishpat says, so what difference is there if there's a kinyan or there's no kinyan? In this scenario, we see over here from this Tosfos clearly that if there is a kinyan, even there was a kinyan, but you didn't do the hechzik, you didn't take physical possession of it, you could still back out based on the oinus that's going to come. Just like by the field, you could back out based on the oinus that's going to come. So it's not only when you only give cash and didn't make a kinyan, it could be also if you made a kinyan, but you never took possession of it. Now let's go back a second. We discussed the whole thing about the machlokes. There's a place where you could do mishapara, you can't do mishapara. In this same topic of nenas, you have a chashash that there's going to be an oinus and you're going to lose your property. So the Erech Shai over here says, Sifkat and Gimel, that let's say the sale was in a davar shaloi baloilam. Davar shaloi baloilam. There's a machlokes if you say mishapara or not. If you back out of a davar shaloi baloilam. So someone sold the davar shaloi baloilam, and the other guy wanted to back out of it. So one of whoever didn't want to back out, was saying, Kimli, I want to hold like the people that say that you cannot back out on this thing, and therefore Kimli that guy has to do mishapara before I give him back his cash. So what wanted to do. The seller wanted to say, I want to demand a mishapara because of Kimli. The Erech Shai says, no, in this scenario, or davar shaloi baloilam, when could you demand a mishapara? Even according to the opinions which say, why by metalton you could demand a mishapara? It's based on the nesivis. The svar is in the nesivis that money is kind of midaraisa, according to certain opinions. Therefore, being that there's a possibility of a kinyan, according to midaraisa, so maybe you still have to receive a mishapara for backing out of it. But if there is no kinyan min ha'torah, like in a davar shaloi baloilam, nobody could say mishapara. No, nobody could demand the mishapara, and therefore, even this guy wants to come and say kimli in the case of a machlekes. Case of a machlekes will only work if you have a svara to say mishapara. But over here, you have enough opinions to say you b'chla can't say mishapara, so you can't even say kimli in such a scenario. And he explains more. He says, and the Bach, which says that the lekeach is considered the nitva, he didn't say it specifically for that case of only by a chashash of oinus that's going to come, that over there there's a machlokes, and in this case we say that the lekeach is a nitva. No. Every case of the lekeach is a nitva for the mishapara. Every case of a mishapara, whoever is backing out becomes the nitva. And in every case when you do that, the kul nitva is a machlekes and a chumra lateveya. And that is in cases when there was money and there was suffix, maybe there was a kinyan deraisa. How much more so in this case when there is no kinyan. And with that, we will conclude today's share.